What is up, everyone? I hope you're having a fantastic day. Right now, we are back in the DAW. Hashtag real YouTuber stuff. I've got a fun one for you today. This is the first song I ever completed 100% on my own, front to back. I've been in bands before, I've worked in studios before, but this is the first thing that I wrote, recorded, mixed, everything with no outside help about a year ago. And luckily, I think that I have improved incrementally in the last year. I actually recently uploaded a full band with vocals hymn cover that I'll put up in the corner here for you. And I want to see if I can get this old track kind of up to my current quality standard using just Ozone. If you're not familiar with Ozone, it is an AI mastering assistant, so it not only has fantastic sounding plugins in it, but it can also listen to your audio, compare it against examples, and give you starting points for settings on the plugins of how to get them closer to those examples. And honestly, it's a fantastic tool. I don't use it every time now. Sometimes I just use some of my favorite standalone plugins. Sometimes I use just certain plugins from Ozone, like they have a great Pultec voice EQ in there. They have a great old school limiter. And sometimes I use the entire Ozone suite, and that's what we're going to do today. So I have pulled up here just the original mix of the song with no mastering chain on. I made no changes to the mix, which was painful. I made a lot of huge errors here, and we're going to see if Ozone is up to the task of fixing these. We are going to, one, quickly listen to parts of my mix, and I'm going to point out huge, egregious mistakes that I've made that I'm going to be looking to fix in the master. We are going to, two, run Ozone, and not just, this isn't some sort of shootout like, does Ozone stock settings fix everything? It doesn't. You should use them as starting points. So we're going to pull up what Ozone thinks, and we're going to make changes from there and talk about that as we go along. And then three, we're going to see how it did. So let's go have some fun together on this one. If you like content like this, go ahead and hit subscribe, and we're going to jump into it right now. Okay, so this is an original pop punk instrumental. I don't like how telephonic I made that middle guitar to get it to fit. I think I was really confused about how to properly use the stereo spectrum and get everything to sound glued together and fit in place. And I really chopped up that lead guitar and made it way too narrow, like a radio sound effect, to get it to fit in the middle. I'm not happy with that. I definitely was not using limiters properly yet. I would kind of just get the tone the way that I wanted it and then do level adjustment and hope that was good. Listen to that snare though. That snare is easily poking out of the entire track like 3 or 4 dB. That's not great. So you can hear going from that broken down sort of beginning of the verse into the second half of the verse where there's far less instruments and then more instruments. I was not using bus compressors properly at this stage of my mixing journey. I wasn't shaving off the proper amount of dB along the way to compress things and glue them together so that even when additional elements are added, it would all sound like one song. This sounds very separated right now. It sounds like all the different tracks, but it's like, are they in the same room? Are they in the same session? Like it kind of has a cool direct punchy thing going on right now instead of all being sucked back and compressed. You know, I like how the guitars are right at front. Everything is just flying all over the place, and that's going to be a major problem. We'll have to see if Ozone can adapt to that. That's another good example of what I mean. It's like those overheads are just flying all over the place. I like the drums as a whole. The drum bus definitely wasn't compressed enough. Certain notes and those octave guitars are peaking way more than others. Just, it's not together. Let's go to a heavier part and see what's going on there. Anything that's more chuggy and with a lot of bass can definitely present some problems. This is a very mid-range focused mix. I still struggle with this now. You know, you clean everything up and you try and make it sound good, and then there's no meat left in the subs, and you try and add it back some other way. In truth, you just shouldn't chop up your tracks so much. Like, this sounds really thin. I think a lot of the treble and presence in this right now is bad treble and presence. It doesn't have that slick, modern sheen on top to give it all some air. Let's go to a bridge now, a very sparse bridge. I hate that super clean guitar there, man. The big video that blew up on my channel in the first place was about how to get those 80s cleans, and I thought I was being creative and going about it a different way here. It sounds nasal, it sounds bad, but hey, that's where we're at now. So obviously I don't endorse using the master to fix everything in the mix. Like, your mix should be well balanced and punchy and all those things you want in the first place. One issue we're going to run into here when we actually run Ozone and start applying processing on it is that changes that the entire mix requires are also going to affect single instrument parts like this. What do I mean? Well, we know that we're going to need to rely on the master to bring in a lot of extra subs and a lot of extra air. Well, now this guitar that should sound kind of plain, it should sound kind of mid-focused. Unfortunately, all of the high end and low end that we're about to add into the master is going to disproportionately affect this. This is a big build here. You're going to hear immediately what the problem is of where this is going. So I have a lead guitar line that I like. This kind of has, like, you know, a mysterious, I don't know, like almost like Pixar song vibe in the middle. So I have those arpeggios going too, but then I still have regular rhythm guitars. I did not understand panning at this point at all. I should have just, in Flame style, had rhythm guitars and like melody lead guitars, hard panned left and right out. I panned those two arpeggio guitars somewhere in the middle on both sides, almost trying to do like a vocal thing where you have your lead vocal front and center and then you have doubles panned out just a little bit. I don't think it worked. I had to EQ these guitars really weird to make space for each other because I just did a poor panning job. I bet, hold on, let's listen. Yeah, that's super muddy. I remember pulling up, I think, different reverbs. I wasn't just sending all similar instruments to one reverb bus that I wanted to use. Like, there's a bunch of different reverbs going on. I managed the entire stereo spectrum very poorly. I think that using some more detune to widen these guitars instead of just trying to super reverb everything would have been a big help. So we're definitely going to need to try to get the stereo spectrum under control here during the Ozone remaster. So luckily the low end doesn't sound too ridiculously out of control there. I was already using multi-band compressors, you know, to kind of keep things in place, but the faster the kick drum is going, the more palm muting you're using. It's just, there's levels all over the place there. And like I said also earlier, what is not helping here at all is a complete and total lack of proper bus compression, because I knew that stuff was out of whack, so I automated a lot, but that can only get you so far. You really need on all your buses just taking off 1, 2, 4 dB along the way. So are all your guitars being loosely brought together in place? And then are all your instruments on the instrument bus being loosely brought back down to place? And then on your 2 bus, is everything being brought back down into place? So incrementally throughout the mix, you're applying a little compression for flavor, a little compression to keep things in place, and by the end you have a very balanced mix. I think on my 2 bus, I didn't even have real compression. I had a little bit of saturation. This does not sound saturated enough, and the places that it does sound saturated are incorrectly. I think I may have only had a really pumpy, like energetic compressor for excitement. I think I may have only even had that blended in parallel. I'm not even sure if on this mix I did an actual like 2 bus compression job. I probably didn't, which is why it sounds so out there right now. We have some chuggy stuff in the outro that may have caused some problems too. Let's look at that. Oh, you know what we missed? Hold on. There's a crazy drum fill that I guarantee is going to drive the fader crazy. That was so much louder than anything else we've seen in the song so far, because the snare isn't limited, the drums are compressed, the mix isn't compressed, so that's going to be a big issue. So again, aside from the lack of compression, I do like how that outro sounds. It's lo-fi. It's got the vinyl scratching noises. That's how I actually heard about Izotope in the first place, is I wanted a vinyl sound effect plugin, and theirs is free. So fantastic marketing on their part. Not too much longer, I bought their entire mastering suite bundle. But again, we're going to run into the problem now that I like how that sounds old and messed up, and I like that there's too much reverb on it. You know, it's supposed to sound distant and old. Our master that's going to fix those problems in the entire mix is also going to affect that outro. Now we're actually going to run Ozone, and we're really trying to fix that. I think the entire mix is too mid-focused. I think a lot of the lead guitars sound really bad because of poor EQ I applied. I think there's too much reverb, so the stereo spectrum is all messed up, or improper application of reverb rather, and the entire thing is just dramatically undercompressed. So let's see what Ozone can do. Alright, slightly more stubbly tank top Kyle from the future past here. There was a catastrophic audio error that the eagle-eyed viewers amongst you will have noticed earlier in the video. And right now I am re-recording the entire remastering process for you. So I'm going to need you to double smash the subscribe button now. I'm going to need you to unsubscribe and then resubscribe. Tell your parents, tell your ex-girlfriend, tell the guy over at the taco stand to subscribe to me, because that's no fun. Except it is fun, because now you get the extra special treat of I get to go through this again and streamline it for you and hopefully speed it up and make a little more sense. So let's go. All right, so we're going to open Ozone. We're going to go over to the mastering assistant. You can see it's waiting for audio now. You generally want to play something representative of the entire track, of course, but also something from the loudest section. So right now we're going to hit that last chorus so it gets an arrangement representative of the song, but it's also going to go through those super loud drum fills, and this is the loudest chorus regardless. So we're going to hit play. and this is very important, then you immediately want to stop listening, because Ozone is going to present you this super hyped, like turning up the loudness button on a stereo sound, and your ears are going to go, oh, that's incredible. No, you don't want that. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to click here to go back to view the individual modules. We're going to hit gain match so the additional loudness isn't fooling us. Let us work backwards. So the maximizer that they put last to hit your target loudness is incredible. It's basically always going to work. You can see it having to go a little crazy because everything is so imbalanced, but everything in the chain before that is hopefully going to let this final maximizer work a little easier at the end of the day. Let's go with the dynamic EQ. You can see it is identified, it looks like 4 different bands here. I mean, look at that, right below 6K, number 4. Boom, that's the snare zone. That's where it's going to be trying to fix my snare. 1 and 3. That's where any low-mid stuff that's out of control is really going to get clamped down on. So we'll see what that sounds like. But I'll bet you immediately this is going to hugely help that bad snare situation that we're in right now. And in general, you know, what is dynamic EQ? It's a compressor for specific frequencies. So this is going to be really great for solving problems after the fact. It's barely doing anything in the low end. It'll probably do more later once we introduce more low end earlier in the chain. But the low end sounds and feels so much more consistent now. And it's just rescuing that snare. All of a sudden, we have something starting to slightly resemble a little bit more reasonable of a mix. So let's go to a really heavy section to see what it's doing. You can see it really working in that fast spot early. I'll turn it off for that. So those guitar rakes into the very fast double bass part. So much better controlled now. So for now, we're going to move on, but we need to reevaluate this when we make changes prior in the chain. Okay, so the imager, like I was speaking about earlier, is going to have to do some heavy lifting in this mix, because this is what controls the width in these different frequency bands. And we're going to try to use this to recover the mix and make everything clean up. So let's start in this first chorus to hear how it's going to handle that center guitar. This is a great tool, by the way. A lot of these modules have this amount function where it's going to blend in how much of the change that you want from 0 to 100. So obviously, you need to go in and dial all these settings to your taste too on these modules, but then you can also blend all of it in or out. So let's crank this to really hear it. So immediately, look, below 120, it's doing a pretty heavy job of monoizing everything. That's a great technique, and something that I just do along the way on all my tracks now. Maybe not all the way up to 120, but I just didn't know about this technique back in the day. Listen to these kicks and just hear how much punchier they get on and off. We'll start with off. Really sucks it all in down low and gives you that modern punch that you want. Now let's go check out that bridge where we know the stereo spectrum is going to be having the largest problem. So when you're looking at these bands, you have basically mids, a wide range of mids, and then you have a wide range of treble. Think about what this means. A huge reduction in the stereo imaging of the air band, you know, like 10K and up. A lot of that air that I left in these lead guitars that is being sent to these big out-of-control reverbs is spreading out all over the stereo field, and it's creating a lot of mud, or not mud, that's for low end, call it fizz, a lot of confusion in the higher frequencies. So really listen to what this is doing in those ARP guitars and the lead guitar. Off. Bringing all that air back into the center for those frequencies is giving you clarity. Whereas if that's all panned out to the sides, it can be really confusing. That's why when you look at a lot of stereoization tools like Eventide, pitch detune, and stuff like that, a lot of what's being sent out into the stereo space, it is a more narrow bandwidth. It's not getting the full signal on the sides. So this is really helping on that front. Okay, so stabilizer is a Gullfoss type thing that is really incredible for making your mix sound consistent. It has this mode where you can set it to subtractive only, or what I like, shape, where it will boost and cut. It's going to dynamically change and bring in these EQ curves over time depending on the input to try to make your mix more consistent all the way through. This is one that you can get really carried away with. Think of how when you're using compressors brought in parallel, not to do heavy duty compression duties, but to be really pumpy and to sound kind of obnoxious and to give the track energy and just blend it in. I kind of view this as the EQ version of that. If you have way too much of this, it'll sound really weird and unnatural, and you'll start to actually hear those EQ curves changing and bad. But if you mix this in at a subtle amount, it'll really give you that layer of consistency your entire track needs. So let's do a quick A/B, and then I'm going to show you a cool feature this has. So you can already see right now what it was doing there. It was really sucking out some problematic mids, and it was helping maintain a low end cohesion while the parts were changing. So let's crank this up to 100% and turn on this delta feature where it's going to isolate and let you monitor just the changes this is making. Hear how that almost sounds like a pumping compressor? But for EQ, so what you're hearing is bands changing, etc. That is what you don't want to come through in your mix, but it really allows you to hear how powerful this tool is. I'm going to adjust this speed and smoothing, these dynamic controls, to make this sound a little more natural. Then we're going to exit delta and blend in the amount we want. So let's go through this chorus. I'm liking that. So obviously you don't want to stay in that delta mode for too long. You want to focus on what the mix actually sounds like. But now I feel like this is going to be a natural sound that I blend in. I'm really liking what it's doing to the low end, but I think it might be a little extreme. And then how it's attenuating these mids is super crucial. I want to go to a part of the song with more sparse mids, like no center guitar, and see how it reacts to that. So you can see how it's actually increasing mids because there's none of that super bad sounding mid lead guitar in the center. And it's adding less lows now because this is a really chuggy part. So I think I want a little bit more of this to make sure the track sounds consistent. I definitely want to keep those mids in place. Sometimes I think this is going to wind up pushing a little too much low end. So let's go ahead and dial that back a little bit. That's so gnarly. That's so bad when I take it out of the mids there. You can see how the highs are being attenuated because look, it says this band starts at 5.6K. To me, that kind of sounds like it's trying to fix the overheads, But don't worry, now when we go back to this equalizer, we'll bring in an overall curve that we like for the song. All right, so let's see what this EQ wants to do. You can hear how that's kind of ridiculous, but it wants to do the right thing. It's bringing in all this air that my mix doesn't have because I didn't really have a proper cohesive workflow. I wasn't just hitting parts along the way with that nice SSL, 8K, 10K, or even Pultec. It's adding some desperately needed subs. This mid band, that's what I was talking about, where this is a band around 250 to 450 that mixers are really afraid of because this is mud, but you need to leave in a good deal of that for your mix to have body and to not sound totally anemic and thin and lifeless and digital. I do think I'm going to want to adjust this though. This upper mid band looks like it's doing a good job too. It might be a little extreme right now, so let's set this back, yeah, right around 100 and kind of fine tune in our curve. Right there, listen to that. I brought it down a little lower. So in that band, I find that even though, again, this can be a problem frequency, like 250, 300, 350, that is where the meat lives. And I really like having that increased body there. When it was about 100 hertz over to the right, more like 450, the closer you get to 500 hertz is more of the big old broad old school honk, like the classic rock, the garage rock sound, which we don't want. We just want more meat. So I'm liking that right now. I think we're going to leave it about there and then use the entire adjustment amount to fine tune at the end. I'm going to straight up undo that. Did you hear how much worse that got? So again, I already like where this one is. I'm gonna reduce the amount of reduction a little bit because I don't want it to get too crazy. And I'm also gonna lower the frequency slightly because a lot of information is in that 1 to 2K range. And the more you suck that out, the more illegible and odd your mix will sound. So I'm gonna, just again, bump it up a little bit and then decrease a little bit. You know what, actually, give me a minute. So yeah, it's really important to make sure that your ears aren't actually in outer space when you've been in your own track for a while. So this EQ is moving us in the direction we need to go, but it's way too extreme right now, so it's blended in. Right around 75% is where I can hear the high end turn on. I think that's where we need to be top and bottom wise. That really gives me the character I want. I think we're going to make sure that that low mid band doesn't get out of control now that we're going to go through the rest of the modules again in order and make sure everything's working properly. There's still some mids coming in extra hot that I don't like, so I think I'm going to adjust this band relative to the others. Yeah, so again, I really just moved that slightly lower to target more of the cardboard frequencies instead of the information frequencies, but you don't want to get too extreme here. This is a good starting point. Let's see what our stabilizer is doing now. So I think the low end is doing exactly what we want, but now that we've increased high end being pushed into the stabilizer, I think this high band is kind of sucking out some of the clarity that we want. You can really hear it with all these lead guitars going on, how the entire mix just kind of sounds a little narrow and AM radio once you have this working on those highs too hard. So I'm going to reduce that high band a lot, just so it's not overcompensating for those highs that we wanted to add back in. And now a good place to take a look at the imager again is going to be that section that we hadn't gone through before, right here. I wanted this to be kind of gazy on purpose, like Astronoid, Deaf Heaven-y. We still want it to sound like part of the song, so let's see. Yeah, that's a big help. I'm leaving that cranked. I think Ozone nailed it out of the gate. Great job, Ozone. Now let's go to some crazy parts to check out our dynamic EQ. You know what? Let's go back to one of those mathy parts. The low end's working exactly how I want. I want this to take care of the snare even more, like just a little bit more. But let's hear it. I actually don't want to use my eyes at all on this. I'm gonna put this off to the side. You know what, that's also actually really affecting some of the air in the guitars. For me, this is a good time to use headphones. I find that using something that sounds worse, I mean, these are fine cans, they're Sense HD380 Pro, but anything that sounds narrower is going to help you hear the mid-range a lot and make sure that it'll translate on a lot of devices. So I'm going to flick the power switch, turn off my monitors, and I'm going to really listen to what this band might be accidentally doing to guitars, or if I like what it's doing to the guitars in relation to the snare. That's actually cleaning it up a lot. I like that move. I'm kind of wondering about our mid-range again here in the stabilizer. I really like the subtractive thing it's doing. I wonder if the additive isn't working that well. Okay, I really like the subtractive stuff it's doing. I think that's super important. I do think it's going a little hardcore on the additive part sometimes when the center guitar drops out. And you know what? Your ears are going to fool you into liking less mids every time. So I think this is a win-win. I'm going to dial back that mid band just a little bit, so even in those choruses, it's not going to be sucking out tons and tons and tons of mids. It's going to stay a little more mellow there on purpose. And then when it's adding mids, like in those verses, it's not going to do as much. I think that's a win. Now let's take a look at the maximizer in our really loud parts. Because this mix is so uncompressed, it's still having to do more than it should, but it's doing a great job. It's not freaking out as much as it was when we first turned it. Okay, so now we're going to do a little fast forwarding. You get to skip this. I'm just going to listen through the entire track a couple times, make sure that I'm not introducing any weird clipping or other artifacting that I don't like, make sure that the loudness is actually consistent, do a little extra fine adjustments, just make sure that the master is as good as it can be, and then we'll see how it did. Okay, so we are back. Let's hear how well Ozone was able to doctor up the atrocious mix that I gave it. I'm loving right out of the gate how much more solid the low end sounds, just consistency wise, and also giving us just a broader frequency spectrum that sounds more modern. I do think there's a lot of compromise existing in the mids right now, in that I had to just suck out a bunch of mids in general that I would have loved to do on specific buses if I were given the chance, but it certainly has the affectation of a better mix aesthetically right now. Let's hear how it handles some dropouts. Yeah, that's ugly. That left guitar that does a fill there, that's what I was talking about. All that high end that we had to add to the entire mix, it's all on that guitar now. That sounds way too aggressive for a little fill that's supposed to, you know, catch the listener's attention and then go back into the chorus. It has a bunch of extra sheen that we don't want on it, but that's the nature of what we're doing. That's 1,000 times better now. It sounds more legible. It doesn't lose the vibe of all those time-based effects, and it just sounds more like a real track now instead of jamming over some random drums you found on YouTube. Let's hear how this is going to handle some of those freak-out parts. I will say that now the low end sounds a little artificial. Like, at least it's relatively well pinned, but that does not sound as good as just properly dialing in your bass tone to begin with, getting it nice and pinned, then having your kick reinforce and play with it well. This is definitely after the fact low end being added back in, and I would have really liked if my low mids and low end were more solid in the first place, and all the master was having to do was add some subs that you more feel than hear. Also, that little band pass fill. That's way too loud now. You want those parts to sound smaller so your chorus sounds huge when it comes back in. And because of all the extra compression work that our master is having to do, it's also going to disproportionately affect those parts that we want to be small, so the rest of the mix can sound loud. That's what dynamics are, and we're having to sacrifice a lot of those right now. Same deal, that part is supposed to sound a little weaker and gently played, and it's bringing up all those cymbal fills in the background a lot. It's making both those guitars the same level, and it's almost as loud as this big build-up it's going into. Not great, but let's see how it handles the bridge with a lot of lead guitar going on. This is really proof of, how much Ozone can handle. It sounds clearer and more separated just because the parts are more legible, but also more glued and grounded at the same time. Now, it's not perfect. It is over scooping to compensate for that. And I do think there's nothing we can really do after the fact now to make those guitars sound normal. They're just weird because I carved them up way too much, but I mean, this is night and day for sure. It really shouldn't be able to control that, but it mostly does. This is another aesthetic compromise that we are having to make, however, because those mathy, stacked atonal things in the background, the guitar's panning back and forth, I wanted those to really sit back in the mix, and now because of what we've done with the imager and adding more air overall, those are really popping out more, and they're not so much freak out moment like, wow, do you guys hear that? What's going on? It's more like they're apart, which I didn't want. I wanted those to kind of disappear, but now we don't get that. Terrible. Yeah, so this is the ultimate example of what I was talking about earlier. The breakdown sounds bigger than the chorus it's about to go into. Now, it's helping out because it doesn't have any low end really in that broken down part. So you still get that big low end thud when the final chorus comes back in. The perceived loudness is greater in that part that's supposed to sound small and supposed to sound mysterious and take the listener on a journey before they go back to the big banger part, which sounds smaller, which huge mistake. But again, that's where I landed myself now. In the upper mids too, you can definitely hear that stabilizer module like I was talking about working. And I think that's kind of a compromise we had to make, like I talked about earlier. There's just, again, think of hearing a compressor pumping. You can hear those EQs moving around, and it's not necessarily really pleasant when it's trying to fix those overheads and the presence range of the guitars. And maybe that's something we could have fine-tuned while we were remastering, but at the end of the day, it gets the mix in the aesthetic direction that we want, and it makes it more listenable. But if somebody with ears is listening to this, it's going to sound a little funky up there now, especially when there's a lot, when we're at a busy part of the arrangement. It handled that drum fill like a champ. I really think this is the takeaway here, that you're going to be remastering based around the loudest, most active parts of the song, and you're generally going to get those to sound good and get into a good place. But you lose all your dynamic control, you lose the aesthetic control over single instrument sparser parts, like I was saying earlier, where maybe you want a guitar to sound kind of mid-focused and back in the mix. Having to do this work in the master is really going to sacrifice the control you would have during the mixing process. You have to paint with a broad brush. You have to paint with a roller at this point. This is definitely where the low end is functioning well too, because the kick and the bass aren't playing on top of each other as often. I like the sound of this mastering low end we've brought in here, because a lot of it's just going on the bass guitar right there because of this part of the arrangement. So right there, that sounds like a nice grindy modern bass, and then the kicks reinforce it every now and then. It's not as jarring as elsewhere in the mix, where the low end definitely sounds a little fake. Listen to how loud the vinyl pops and noise are now because the compressors bring it up. Oh man, I don't even want to talk about that again. That's just that lost control that we have now. So what did we learn today? Well, a lot of people will just, scream and moan that Ozone is cheating, and then a lot of people, on the other hand, will say that, like, wow, Ozone will fix all my problems, and I don't even have to do anything. Obviously, both of those are incorrect. I think what Ozone represents is a great starting point for people that are wanting to start to learn about mastering, because you can use those different reference tracks. Let's go back to the assistant. Boom, we could tell this to do rock, reggae, we could load our own. We could use those different references to help point you in the right direction. It will point out big glaring issues in your mix, but it's not gonna master it for you. You still need to use your ears like anything else in audio. I think the second thing we learned is just make sure your mix is good in the first place, because you're gonna sacrifice a lot of control by the time you get to your master. I lost all the dynamic range in this, and you can hear this all over famously bad remasters, or especially that late O's, early 10s part of the loudness war, where like big platinum selling artists were just coming out with terrible masters. Yes, I like modern sounding music. I like things to be cranked all the time. I like things to sound really full and modern and punchy, but there's a detriment to that. There's parts of this song where the broken down, radio lo-fi part sounds bigger than the chorus that comes after that. And that's a huge mistake. You never want that. And my current mixes don't do that, I don't think, so that's good. And I think the third thing that I've learned is my mixes are so much better now. I'm so happy. They're not pro, but go again, listen to that hymn song that I put in the cards up above. I didn't encounter any of these problems in mastering. I got to use my mastering as an enhancement phase and a loudness phase, which is the way it's intended. So thank you for hanging out with me today. I hope you learned a thing or two. Feel free to ask me whatever you want down in the comments. I'm sure this comes off a little rambly even after the edit. I just did this stream style, did everything, right in front of you. I'm definitely embarrassed having my old mix mistakes out in front of everybody. I'm definitely embarrassed having to try to fix them in a master right now, and knowing that this is not winding up in the best place possible, and that is what it is. So, go on this journey of getting better at guitar and getting better at mixing and engineering, come on the journey with me. So subscribe down below, and as always, remember to pick up your guitar or instrument of choice, have fun today, and try to get a little bit better than you were yesterday. I really appreciate you, and I'll see you next time.